Let's take a look at how you create an Excel pivot table. Now, still in front of you, I'm on the sales data worksheet. Make sure you navigate to that worksheet. You can follow along with me and go through the steps. You're going to find that creating the summary information, creating something like this on the right-hand side based on this table on the left, it's actually just a few clicks of the mouse. It's really quick to do. I hear so many people that come into my Excel courses where they say, I want to learn pivot tables. I've heard that they're pretty complex. They're really difficult to work with. They're actually not that difficult. A couple of clicks and drags of the mouse, and you've summarized the data really quickly. The most time-consuming part of building a pivot table is deciding what it is that you want to summarize within that pivot table. Do you want to see the sales by year, by month? Do you want to break it out by salesperson, by type? How do you want it to look so you can present that data? That's the most time-consuming part. But once you've got that down, you've decided what it is that you actually want to report off of and display. It's really simple to do. And we're going to take a look at that right now. Now, before I create the pivot table, a really good piece of advice right here. There's two ways that you can make references to the data that you want to include inside the pivot table. One, you can just reference the range of cells. I can just say, hey, pivot table, I want you to create a pivot table based off of cells A4 down to there's a couple hundred records inside here, down to H448. That's what I want to include inside the pivot table. But although that works, the issue is if the pivot table updates, meaning, or if the data, the list updates, the new records are added or records are deleted, the pivot table is still looking at that range, A4 to H448, right? So that's one way. But again, if the pivot table grows or increases in the amount of records or shrinks because the records are deleted, the pivot table is still looking at that same range. So you might be leaving data on the table. You might be leaving it out of the pivot table. Okay? So another way to do this is to turn this list into a table, format it as a table, and then use the table name inside the pivot table reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click into this list and try this out. Click into the list, doesn't matter where. I'm going to go to the Home tab, and underneath the Style section, I'm going to do Format as Table. And I'm going to pick a style. Really doesn't matter which one we pick. This is just more of a preference. What colors do you like? Do you want alternating rows? Whatever. I like blue, so I'm going to grab this one here. Medium blue. I'll grab that. All right, so our data range is A4 to H448. We saw that just a moment ago. And our table does contain headers, year, month, type, salesperson, and so on. So I'll hit OK. And we've now formatted the table, or the list, as a table. And I can use that table name, table 3 right now. This is if you click into the list, you can go to the table design tab, and you got the table name right there. Let's just call this yearly sales. No space in the table name. Okay. Now, when I create the pivot table, I could use that name. And if the table increases in size, more records are added, records are deleted, whatever happens, the pivot table still knows where to find the data. All right, so once it's formatted as a table, I'll then click into my list. I'm going to go to Insert, and on the Insert tab, first option there, we got Pivot Table. I'm going to go ahead and click Pivot Table. All right. Create the pivot table. So first step wants us to select where the data is at, right? Where is your data contained? Well, we're going to select a table or range. Remember those two options. It's already picked up on yearly sales because I clicked into the table. Whatever you named the table, maybe it's table 3 or 1 or 2 or yearly sales. You also have the option to pull from an external data source. For us right now, our example here, we're going to pull from a table range. A data model, if you get into Excel Power Pivot, you can create data models and you can use that as your data source. And then the second step is where you want to place the pivot table. So for us right now, I'm going to stick with our table, whatever you've named it, yearly sales in my case, and I'm going to put it on a new worksheet. Earlier when I built this one for demonstration, I put it on an existing worksheet. Okay. Now, last option here. If you do have Power Pivot enabled, and that's something that we will discuss in a future section of this course, you will have the option to add it to an Excel data model. But if you do that, there's lots of stuff you can do with Power Pivot, a lot of really fancy stuff. But if you do add it to an Excel data model, there is some limitations on the pivot table side of things. Grouping is one of those limitations. So if you want to build a group, I would suggest keep that option turned off. If you don't care about grouping, but you want to take advantage of Power Pivot and other tools, then you could turn that on and add it to a data model. Now, once again, but you got to take advantage of Excel Power Pivot, and we'll talk about that in a future section. So for now, grab our table, new worksheet. I'm going to hit OK. Excel creates a new worksheet for us. Mine is just called Sheet 1. Yours might be Sheet 2 or 3 or whatever, but it did create a new worksheet there. And you got three important elements here. You got kind of the beginning portions of your pivot table. Doesn't look like much right now. You should now have a pivot table fields lists on the right hand side, and you get a couple of new tabs at the top of the screen. So make sure you try this out. Click into your list, format it as a table, get that name, and then insert pivot table, pick your source, table name, tell it to put it into a new worksheet, and you should be looking at something like this right here. There might be some minor differences, but something like this right here. So get to that point. You've created the beginnings of your pivot table, and then we'll start to actually design it, modify it, get it to look the way that we want it to.